in person. Now, even this 30% of postal ballots is almost like 3 times more than what 4 years back it used to be. The kind of volume is going to be overwhelming for the election offices, the postal service, and everybody to serve. And trust me when I say that the idea of litigations running into thousands is not something which is hypothetical. It is going to be there. And when it is going to be there, one thing you can be assured of that on the 3rd of November evening, the person who has been in the line and voted in person, that is the will be considered as the most legitimate ballot in the eyes of the law. That the person was there in person, standing there and doing the needful. So, whenever in terms of law, in terms of legal cases, the way it might fan out is that the people who were in the line and voting on the day of the on the 3rd of November will be considered as sacrosanct. That okay, there is no problem with that. Second would be those who voted early in person, they would be taken okay, no problem with that. Third would be those who use the postal ballots. Now, the states which are 100% postal ballot, there would not be any issue. But the states which have opened up for postal ballot right now, that is where you are going to face a lot of problem, because there would be claims and counterclaims whether this particular thing should be accepted on the 3rd or the 2nd, on the 4th, and so on and so forth. And to mind you that on the 3rd night, when the counting starts, when the basically in US, as you know, the way it happens is the moment the West Coast polling, stops, at that point of time, the projections start coming in, which is a fusion of returns from the counties and the exit poll thing. Now, exit poll now this time would be obviously for the people who are in the line, and there would be adjustment of the estimates for the postal ballots who have voted early from the current polls. But having said that, the actual returns from the counties or the states would be first from those who have voted on 3rd of November in person. This is why it would be like in the initial counts, it is likely that Mr. Trump is going to have a lot of lead before the postal ballots are started counting in. But the postal ballots in majority of the states probably are going to be counted after they have counted the ballots done on the 3rd of November. Are you getting? I mean, if you have any of the questions, please do raise your hand. Let me know if you are getting it right. But what I'm trying to say that on the 3rd of evening, when you pull on the networks, then the returns from the counties, return from the states would be largely from the in-person votes which are cast on that day first. And that is likely to show Mr. Trump in early lead. And the moment you show it in early lead, he is going to start screaming and shouting everywhere on the roof of the top that I have won the elections. And this is where Hillary Clinton has clearly advised Joe Biden not to concede on 3rd night, come what may, because that is going to be very, very confusing. In the first 8 to 10 hours, you are likely to see a Trump lead. And after that, when the postal ballots start being counted, you can see that the tide is turning. Now, this turning of the tide, this is precisely where the litigations will start coming in. The moment I fear, the moment the tide will start turn while counting in the postal ballots, this is precisely where I guess the entire Republican paraphernalia will go in for the legal ways of harassing, obstructing, stopping, suspending that particular count. And I might not be in a good position to predict right now who is going to win the election. Mr. Joe Biden is easily ahead at this point of time. But what I can probably predict that it is going to be one hell of a messy affair. Messier, much messier than what we had seen in Al Gore and Mr. Bush. Much talked about the Florida fiasco that we had seen. So be ready for a very, very murkier, long-term, debated, legally fought verdict. Having said that, one thing probably is going to not take this in this direction. That thing is, if by any chance, even on the 3rd of November, the turnout remains low in person and big number of voters of Joe Biden camp come out and the early trend starts showing in a clear-cut Joe Biden's lead. And that in that particular position, where Trump camp knows that, okay, if we are losing the ballot on 3rd of November, then we are going to lose the postal ballots and we are going to lose the overall game, and they might concede in that way. But as you all know, Mr. Trump, he is not the kind of person who is likely to gracefully accept defeat. That is so un-Trumpish way to look into the things. From here till 3rd of November, I believe, largely you are going to see the polls which will show Mr. Biden's lead in double digit, or even if in single digit, it will be something like 6, 7, 8, 9 points, something of that sort. In majority of the swing states, it is said that Mr. Biden is still leading by very, very healthy margins. But then most of the polls are coming from RV perspective, that is the registered vote perspective. The more I analyze in terms of LV, that is the likely vote, I find this to be closer than what everybody else is saying. I believe this is not going to be as easy and cakewalk as the Biden camp is expecting it to be. So this is where I'm kind of red flagging it a little bit, that one needs to be careful while reading too much into the data at this point of time. At the end of the day, what matters is that how many people actually go out and vote. And please be very careful while reading the report that, okay, we might have a historic high of turnout. That is something I'm also red flagging right now, because in our data, we are finding clear evidence of what is the process called as cannibalization of voters, which simply means what you are watching in early vote or postal ballot is simply a transformation of the voting practice. Basically, big number of those who would have voted on 3rd are you voting early, but that may or may not mean a bigger number of voters coming out. Our data is not supporting that. Our data is clearly saying that bigger number of people would be voting early, but that may or may not mean that you will see a historic high turnout. That historic high turnout, that notion is coming from extremely polarized public opinion in the polls. People are extremely polarized while answering surveyors sitting in their homes. Being in their drawing rooms, people are extremely, extremely involved. But as we know for sure, the number of ballots that have been given for postal ballots, what we call as the allocation of postal ballots, vis-a-vis number of ballots which are returning, there is some gap in that ratio. And I don't see the youngsters, the Generation X, as we are calling.
Can you connect your Zoom?
Sanders, Bhakts, if you may call it. Those Bernie Sanders or Bernie Army, they are not really showing big inclination of a historic turnout jump as such. At least in my data point, I'm not getting that. So I am still not very sure this is going to be a historic high turnout unless I get to see more data point, which might serve as empirical evidence to say that. Right now, I am looking at a more of a possibility that this 60% who would be voting early, a big majority of them happens to be the same voter who would have actually voted on November 3rd. It is at this point of time, as we are talking this, I am not finding any empirical evidence to suggest that there would be a historic high turnout. I am not finding, at least in my data. We'll see. Still, there is a lot of time to go, and the gap between the voting age population, registered vote, and the likely vote. This is what is going to be the typical battle of how it is going out to be. And in terms of, as you know, all the issues that it is highly polarized society as far as American elections are concerned right now. There is not much of a middle voter in America. Earlier, we used to have about 15 odd swing states. And as we talk right now, those numbers of swing states have gone down to about 8. So number of swing states getting down actually means more and more polarization in that way, this way or that way. And this is what is making American election more about relative turnout, about turnout of which echo chamber is more, and particularly on the election day and in-person voting as well. And that will make a big difference in the outcome, and particularly in the swing states. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be messy. We might be having a much clearer Bihar verdict than a clear American verdict. Thank you.
Thank you, Yashwant, for that wonderful analysis. So you are predicting that game is not over for Trump. That the high turnout on November 3rd may make all the difference, may make or mar the elections, and there can be a series of litigations. The legal teams of Republicans may be ready if it's and the swing also you have mentioned of the swing in the different counties. So overall, we got a broader or rather a perspective of what is happening on the psephological front. I think maybe it comes out, and 4 years down the line, what you predicted, I still remember that, the Hillary part. Yeah, so I think you'll be spot on. We can expect a murkier, messy polls and a clear Bihar elections rather than unclear US elections, as you put it across. So thank you, Ishwar, very much. I will invite Vinitha Krishnan, who is in the ground zero. She's the Naturalist of America. She's a journalist by profession. She's been doing shows over there, and I think she can speak on what is happening down on the ground zero in the United States. Vinitha, please, your turn right now.
Thank you, Arun, for inviting me to be part of this webinar. It was wonderful listening to Srinivasan sir and Mr. Deshmukh, and look forward to listening from Lalu Joseph a while later. I live in Edison. It's a township in central New Jersey. I finished my college in 2000, got married and came here. So that means I've been here for the last 20 years. So in the past, I used to feel that elections here are not like massive events like we have in India. People are not that inclined in politics or, in general. And I mean, it's very different. And I have felt that in the past elections, but that is clearly not the situation right now. The atmosphere is very politically charged. And as we can see, early voting, both in person and mail-in, are already in record numbers, pretty much everywhere, even including the battleground states like Ohio or Georgia. And people are waiting for several hours and long lines. So one thing is certain, Americans take this election very seriously. Now, reports say that registered Democrats are significantly outpacing the Republicans, but the Republican Party says the supporters will make up the difference on November 3. I think Mr. Deshmukh touched a few things on that aspect. And also, I see a lot of youngsters who had been indifferent to elections in the past are now voting. So all of these, plus the opinion polls that we have right now in front of us, suggest a Biden victory. But like all of you know, many people are still very skeptical of what happened in 2016. Everybody expected Hillary to win, but she did not. Then, you know, after the 2016 election, there were some studies to find out what really went wrong in terms of opinion surveys. And one of the findings was this, the people who participated in most of the surveys were college educated, and they mostly voted for the Democrats. So whites without college degrees who voted for Trump were underrepresented in those polling samples. And those who are doing the surveys right now say that they've made some corrections in their methodology. Anyway, the president keeps repeating that there's a widespread voter fraud that may favor Joe Biden without proper evidence. So I wonder if he's even expecting to lose. Okay, I mean, whenever he's asked why isn't he assuring a peaceful transfer of power if his opponent wins, he brings in voter fraud. Now, as part of the election coverage for a few media outlets, I've been reaching out to Republicans, Democrats, progressives, and independents. And my experience has been something like this. Apart from his very loyal base, there are many within the Republican Party who do not like President Trump's behavior, okay, like his reckless tweeting or bullying style, or his ill-informed remarks and all, but still they are voting for him because of his conservative policies. They feel the Democratic Party has turned sharply to the left, and they have fears of more government control, more taxes, and so on. Coming to the Democratic camp, they are seemingly enthusiastic and hopeful, especially considering what's going on in this country right now, such as the pandemic and issues with the economy. But they aren't overconfident, so they keep asking people to ignore the opinion polls and vote. Independents feel they usually do not get the best choices, will vote for the lesser evil. And I have come across many voting for Biden this time. But I've also talked to some in the progressive wing within the Democratic Party, the supporters of Bernie Sanders. They're not generally fond of establishment Democrats like Biden, but they want Trump out. But not everyone seems to have that opinion. A progressive leader who I talked to feels that a Biden presidency will just be a continuation of the past. The policies of the past administration, and that's not going to bring any real change to the American working class. So these are the different perspectives I got from the people who belong to these different sections. Well, if we look at the domestic issues, COVID-19 is still a very worrying thing over here. It's still a major concern. So the handling of the virus, not just by the Trump administration, but also by the state governors, the initial failures, such as the lack of preparedness that led to so many getting sick and dying, and then the president has downplayed the severity of the illness. Now Biden says if he is elected, he would not lock the country down, but will implement mask mandate if scientists advise him to do so. So COVID-19 is still much in debate all across the US. Then let's come to the economy. It was doing quite well until the pandemic hit, considering the low unemployment rate among minorities. But since March, people have lost jobs, businesses have closed down. The first stimulus check and the unemployment benefits have been helpful, but the second stimulus bill is not yet out. Then the racial tensions that followed the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement. Trump has been accusing mostly the left for the violence and not right-wing extremists. And this, I feel, has escalated the tensions. However, Trump has announced a platinum plan to enhance the lives of African Americans through economic development. So we really need to see what would be the outcome of all of these combined. To wait and watch. And then the appointment of conservative judges during the Trump presidency and the current Supreme Court nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, that's another debate going on. So as of now, Joe Biden hasn't given a clear answer to the question of packing the courts with more judges who are aligned more with their policies and beliefs. So there's a little confusion over there. And coming to foreign policies, Srinivasan sir said a very valid point, and many Americans seem to appreciate the fact that Trump has led the country into new wars. And the deal between Israel, UAE, Bahrain is historical. But then again, him pulling out of the Iran nuclear pact or the Paris Climate Accord, these things have been controversial. So one thing is, in the current scenario, the foreign policies or even the immigration issues that were much talked about in 2016, they're not hot topics, I feel, because of the many domestic problems the country is dealing with right now. Then coming to Indian American voters, they make up less than 1% of the electorate, which is not big, but they do have a significant presence in swing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. And the Indian community is the richest over here. They are twice as rich as the country as a whole. Again, Srinivasan sir mentioned that already. Both parties are trying to get their support through fundraising and stuff. Now, the historic candidacy of Kamala Harris with her Indian roots has created some enthusiasm in certain sections of the Indian American community. But the Republicans have been projecting Trump as Prime Minister Modi's best friend and good for India, and when it comes to Kashmir or China. But one thing to be noticed is Trump during there was a very chaotic and disastrous presidential debate. I don't know how many people noticed it. He said something, President Trump said, COVID numbers from China, Russia, and India cannot be trusted. So was he questioning the integrity of the Indian system? So anyway, recent polls suggest that Indian votes are in favor of Biden, and this was already made clear by both Srinivasan sir and Mr. Deshmukh, and traditionally Indians always seem to favor the Democratic Party. Then immigration is another issue. This is not regarding the Indians who are already voting or who are settled in this country like me, a permanent resident, green card holder. The Trump administration has been tightening rules regarding the H-1B work visa programs that affects Indians in the US who are working in the IT sector and those who want to come here with this visa. So the approval for new H-1s have been falling in recent years. More applicants asked for additional information, the request for evidence or RFE as you call it. And also Trump has announced a temporary suspension of H-1B until the end of this year when the coronavirus surged. But that order was blocked by a federal judge. Now Biden, on the other hand, said he will positively reform, and that's what he's saying right now. We really have to wait and watch how the politician will actually behave when they are in power. But at least he says that he will positively reform the H-1B visa system. As well as the green card processing. Many hundreds of thousands of Indians are waiting for a green card because of the country cap. It's just a nightmare for many Indians who are living in this country on work visas. So definitely this is another Indian issue when it comes to deciding who should govern America next. But this particular section of Indians, they do not have voting rights in the first place. But both American and Indian IT companies, it's really critical for them how this is going to play out. What would be the immigration policies, particularly regarding the work visa. by the next administration. So these are the key issues from the domestic end that I can talk about. At least we can discuss further as we move along. Also, Aaron?
Yeah, tell me. Hello?
Yeah, I explained some of the things I wanted to talk
Yeah,
about.
I think, you can talk for some more time because Lalu has some
Lalu
problems
is
with
not-
his net.
Oh, okay.
Not available.
Oh, all
You can
right,
talk.
no problem. May I ask a couple of questions to Srinivasan sir, and then we can have a slight discussion? Is it okay?
Sure, I'll be happy to answer.
Yes, sir. Of course, any questions about anything that I said regarding the domestic issues, you can
Yeah,
talk.
that will come back to you. That will come back to you.
Yeah.
That will
Sir,
come back to you. That will come back to you. Yeah.
Right. So could you throw some light into the Middle East, the peace deals that's been going on, that Mr. Trump had brokered? So do you think, what is your opinion about that?
Well, that will probably go down in history as his biggest achievement, I think. Although it has not been fully projected as such as yet. But if you look at the overall achievements of foreign policy, of Trump's foreign policy, perhaps this is the most concrete and lasting one. Because as you know, Egypt-Israel relations with the Arab states has been very crucial for world peace and international security. And many wars have been fought. And this was considered an imponderable and unacceptable situation. I remember in 1979, I was in Cuba in the Non-Aligned Movement conference when Egypt signed this treaty, peace treaty with Israel. And the inclination of all of us were to throw Egypt out of the Non-Aligned Movement. And it was but very patient work by India, Yugoslavia, Cuba, and Algeria that managed to keep Egypt inside the Non-Aligned Movement. But today, when this happened, nobody ever protested. No country in the world had any complaint about UAE making up with Israel or Bahrain doing that. So that shows how much world has changed and become totally fed up with this Israel-Arab.
Sir, can I intervene for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Can I intervene for a second? Is it leading up to the diplomatic relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia to that end? Because UAE, Bahrain, and leading up to Saudi Arabia. Will it happen like that?
Saudi Arabia is behind.
And
Saudi
in the
Arabia is behind all.
other spectrum, we can find the Chinese advancing towards Iran and to Afghanistan likewise. So is it?
Yeah, I'll come to that. I was coming to that.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, Saudi Arabia is very much behind these two moves by UAE and Bahrain. Without Saudi Arabia's support, they could not have imagined this. So the best thing that Mr. Kushner did, that is the president's son-in-law, did was to build up relations with Saudi Arabia. And that gave a lot of confidence to the other Arab countries. Then we must also remember that the oil is not a weapon anymore, because now oil is available in the United States. They are not dependent on the Middle East. And therefore, their interest has waned. So they were willing to make adjustments, whatever way they wanted. In the Iraq war time, the crucial issue was oil. But now it is not so for the United States, at least. All of us have that oil issue, but others don't have. And so Saudi Arabia is very much there, but they are not doing it because they want to do it slowly and steadily. But it is taken for granted that Saudi Arabia is very much with us. And there the complication is, of course, Iran. Iran is now the only country which seems to, to support Palestine absolutely, because everybody else is willing to make compromises. And handing over East Jerusalem, Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, was a major thing, which would have created a war if it had happened, say, 3 or 4 years ago. There again, very little happened because there is no Arab unity with the Palestinians. So it has moved into a pragmatic level. So now the conflict is between the GCC and Iran. This is the old Shia-Sunni conflict. And that is what China is trying to exploit, because China is doing this to spite not only the Sunni countries, but also India, because Iran has had a civilizationally good relationship with India. And therefore, they have created some kind of a problem there by moving towards Iran in a big way, and thus supporting the Pakistani interests in the region. So that's a concern for us. But as far as the Middle East solution is concerned, and also the question of the two-nation theory becoming into reality, I think a big contribution has been made by the Americans. But in the context of the elections, this is not being projected very much, because I have a feeling that the impression in America among the general public is that everybody in the Middle East is bad. You know, that's the kind of, if you ask an ordinary person, for example, I remember when the Americans were fighting in Kuwait to liberate Kuwait, many Americans did not understand why they were fighting for an Arab country. So their understanding is a little bit confused, and they thought that they were fighting the Arabs rather than fighting for the Arabs. So, and that kind of consciousness about the political situation and whatever is acceptable to Israel will be acceptable to the people of the United States, because the influence of Israel is so much in the US. As you know, New York has more Jews than Israel has. New York Times is called the New York Times. You know? So that is the kind of influence they have. And the American president doesn't do anything without consulting the Israeli ambassador in Washington. I know it for a fact. So this is the kind of situation. So whatever Israel accepts will be acceptable to the people of the United States, and therefore this will not be an issue as far as this election is concerned. But there's another feather in his cap. We can argue that this is another accomplishment that he has made in foreign policy. What did you say? Sorry.
Yeah, and thank you. And I was just about to ask about the Jewish angle in this. You know, that's what I really wanted to hear. Thanks for giving that information to us.
What is this? Sorry. What is the second point?
I had a point to what Ambassador Srinivasan just said. Sitting in Dubai, I know how big that was. You know, the way this side of the world has taken the Israel deal. It is a watershed moment in the history, actually. Surprisingly, I tried to look how American media is covering it, and particularly the American liberal media is covering it. It took 3 days for CNN to take cognizance of this deal. 3 days. Can you imagine? And on the third day, the piece that CNN put across was that, what's the big deal? It's just an extension of the old thing which was happening. No big deal. And that is where I was, honestly speaking, a bit shocked and disappointed. Because, when I'm watching the American media, I know I never take Fox seriously. I know where they stand, But when I look into the other media brands and I look into that, the least I expect them is to be honest about other things. Their criticism of Trump is okay, understandable, and which is correct, but opposing Trump to an extent that they just denied the gravity of this deal, that it was a watershed, it was an important thing. And I mean, for America, forget about Trump. I mean, I'm not even saying that who executed it, but in terms of Middle East policies and the future of Middle East, this was a turning point. This is something probably we are not even discussing how big it has been. But American media has completely eclipsed it. And I fail to understand that since then, I mean, since that happened, I have started looking at the American media per se with a very, very careful manner, that I feel that in their entire excitement of opposing Donald Trump in totality has also reached to that level that probably they have become mirror of Fox News in this side of narration peddling? I mean, this is what I have started looking into now. That I expected the liberal media of America to have been treating the Israel-UAE deal with the same kind of fairness that they do with other things, but that did not happen. So maybe, Vinita, you might be in a better position to tell a lot about that, what is happening as a news consumer, that you are consuming news and looking at the electorate. But coming from, I live in Dubai, and I can tell you, it was a big deal. It was a game changer deal, and it is going to be a watershed movement when few years from now, when we look back and see this has been a big deal.
May I say something? May I say
Vinita,
something?
you can
Vinita, just
speak.
before you answer him, the
Yeah.
point to remember is that which section of the people in the United States were supposed to oppose it? Because Egypt, I just said that Israel has such a deep influence in the United States. That the so-called liberals, etc., are not liberals in that sense. They always try to serve the interests of the United States, and that is very special about the U.S. media. And therefore, there was nothing to ignite a controversy on this, because there is no lobby in the United States. But look at India. We are the greatest supporters of Palestinians. How much, even a small incident in Gaza used to, ignite the Indian Parliament to pass resolutions against Israel. Now, where is it? So Israel has become generally more acceptable everywhere. In India, particularly, we have a very solid relationship with Israel. And therefore, the traditional lobby or the opposition or the Congress party, nobody said anything about these deals. They may have said something very quietly, politely, etc. But there was really no emotional opposition to this. And that is what Mr. Trump has exploited. And it will only benefit him. But as I said, but in the elections, it is not going to make any difference. Just as Mr. Deshmukh pointed out, that there has not been any reaction. And that means it is positive reaction.
Vinita, you can speak now.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Deshmukh that media is biased. I can clearly see that, except it's polarized, I would say. But one thing is, the president addresses the people through press conferences, and he has his rallies. So people can get to hear his points directly from him, and they can judge. You really don't have to go through any specific report that is coming out in New York Times. So you can listen from the man himself, what he has been saying. That is why I'm really disappointed with what happened with the first presidential debate. Did anyone watch that? It was chaotic. It was absolutely disastrous. See, I always like this fact of the presidential candidates debating before the citizens. They get to share their points, directly with the people. Unfortunately, it was such a nightmare. It was such a disappointment. That is one thing across the political spectrum. Everyone agrees. If Trump had some achievements, he did not say it. And Mr. Biden could not really get his point across. All right, so there is another debate coming. I think it's on the 22nd. We are keenly watching, because this is where you get to hear from your leaders directly. And in this particular matter, at least in the presidential debate, you cannot blame media or anybody else. Here is the platform for you to express your thoughts, present your policies before the public, and give an opportunity to the Americans to make up their minds once and for all. We had a town hall meeting a few days ago. Again, this was on different channels at the same time. So people, were switching in between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden as to what they're saying. I got to understand more about the policies through that, when they were not together, when they were sitting in different channels and explaining. So let us watch the next debate. Hopefully they can present the ideas and really give the people of this country a chance to understand what they're going to do in terms of healthcare, how they're going to deal with this COVID situation in the future. Because as we know, there is not going to be a dramatic change in the pandemic situation anywhere in the world very soon. It's going to continue. That is why I told as my first point that the domestic issues, when you see, I belong to the Indian community. Most of us are working in the IT industry. We are home working from, we have probably we can call as a privileged group, most Indians. That is not the case when you look outside. Businesses have been closing and people are actually suffering. So whether President Trump continues or Joe Biden coming to power, they really need to explain. They really need to come out with their plan as to how to control or how to keep things under control regarding the pandemic, as well as moving the economy forward. So I would invite everybody to please listen to what is going to happen. If it happens, it's been so unpredictable. After that chaotic debate, President Trump got infected with COVID. He was hospitalized. He was coming out of the hospital. We thought there wasn't an official confirmation as to whether or not he was infected during the debate. And I think he's declared negative right now. So hopefully the next debate will happen. So then again, you really do not have to read too much into the reports of NYT or CNN or ABC or Fox. This is a free country and there are presidential debates. Let us, we really want a chance to listen to these candidates, them directly.
May I ask you
That's a
something?
good point. Yeah, Srinivasan, you can carry on.
Vinitha,
Vinitha made a
may
good
I ask
point on
you-
that.
may I ask
Yeah,
you
yeah,
a
you can talk.
question? Why does she depend so much on this debate and think that what is said in the debate will be implemented? Mr. Trump can change anything at any time. So what is the such sanctity about the debate? Because debate was a shame on American democracy. But
Correct.
to think that he would, do what he says in the debate, we know it very well that it will not happen. So I don't attach any importance to the debate, but it was a disastrous debate because that is not the purpose of it. And therefore, both of them failed in a sense, because neither of them was able to take hold of the situation. But after that, whatever president has done is much more deplorable. The kind of things about his disease and how he came out and how he spread the disease in the White House. All those
And
are
how
even
he
more
does not
deplorable
believe
than
in
the
fights
debate
or
itself.
masks. Absolutely.
So I'm not banking.
So far,
And
it
also
has
hearing from the president via tweets is not a good idea, because that means what he says is not considered by his supporters and by his officials. That's the problem. When you issue something, a president issues something, it is well thought out, discussed. But if the president is tweeting on his own from the White House without consulting his national security advisor or the Secretary of State, it is not worth it. So this Twitter diplomacy has not helped the United States nor the world, because you could expect anything at any time by a tweet from the president, and that is not screened or considered by. That is why the supporters walked out in dozens from his White House. So all these these institutions have been completely derailed by this election.
That is
Srinivasan,
one thing I pointed out in the beginning, that even the Republicans are averse to his tweeting and the unpredictability factor. So my point was, Mr. Deshmukh was asking about the media bias, right? You were asking about, I completely agree. They are all right, they have their agenda. So whenever, whether it's a tweet or the rally or a press conference, whatever they're doing, that is the only option for ordinary Americans to listen to these people as to what they would be doing. Even though Trump.
My point was, I totally agree with you and with Mr. Srinivasan as well, that I was expecting, and I have always expected in the countries, particularly in the West, wherever I have worked in UK or in US or in some other countries as well. Regardless of their editorial lines, I always expected them to be at least fair in terms of their coverage. So, of course, there was nothing to be criticized in the Middle East deal, but for my problem was that it was a good deal and they were not acknowledging it, that it is a good deal. That was my problem. Just because they feared that if they will say this is a good deal, Mr. Trump will benefit out of it. That was the clear underlining position, editorial positioning of all the publications actually, and not just the CNN. I tried to gather, I tried to read whatever I could, but I could not find it the way I was expecting it. I did not find it. So that was the one thing. And of course, things are, I am as disappointed with CNN right now as I am with Fox News. Let me be, and I have been a CNN fan. But I am as disappointed with CNN right now as I am with Fox. And one thing which, on a lighter note, I can tell you that Mr. Trump's visit to India might not have changed anything in India, but it has certainly changed the TV debates in US. What he has learned from Indian television stations of debates, primetime debates, that is what has changed in America. And that is something which I am not very proud of, but yeah, it's funny to see that.
Srinivasan sir, TPS. Srinivasan sir, hello.
Yeah.
Sir, actually coming back to what Yashwant said in his first talk, that the elections now it's not, Trump is gone.